Hey everyone, welcome in! I'm echohack, and this is your Druid Skills Guide to help you prepare for Diablo 4 launch. In this guide, I'll go into detail on each and every Druid skill and share my analysis on the class as it stands today. You'll see these helpful skill cards throughout the video, so if you're unfamiliar with the skill, you can read its effects right here. Now, many of you have already played the Diablo 4 open beta, so you might have some beta brain surrounding the Druid's capabilities. And while I think that the Druid's leveling skills are still mostly in a poor spot, there are good and effective leveling builds for the class. More importantly, skills are just the blueprint or the foundational layer of a class's capability, and you won't really see the Druid's true power until you gain a significant amount of legendary aspects later on in the leveling stages of the game. I've already spoken to my fellow creators at Maxroll on this, and we agree that the theory crafting for Druid is quite good, especially as the class's legendary aspects come online. So, if you have your heart set on playing Druid at launch, don't give up on it, because there will be competitive builds available at endgame. Even more importantly, Druid has 25 active skills available in the game, more than any other class. That gives them incredible flexibility in skill choice, but it's also a double-edged sword because some of these skills are just terrible for leveling. All that said, let's jump right into our basic skills. Claw is our initial werewolf skill, and it's quite bad. There's not many redeeming qualities here. The damage output is low, it's melee range, so it's easier to take damage, and there's no defensive benefits. It's fairly terrible for leveling as well. I'd recommend avoiding this skill entirely if you can. Maul comes in as another melee skill, but this time for Werebear. The difference here is huge in that Maul offers Fortify on percentage-based life, which is one of the best defensive scaling modifiers in the game, and it also offers Knockdown. There are still better options for leveling because Maul is melee range, so that opens you up to increased damage, but don't completely write this skill off, especially if you need a melee defensive resource generator later down the line. Earth Spike is one of our two nature magic and ranged basic skills, and it's a fairly bad skill. Even though it has some interesting mechanics, and there are some really interesting earth magic synergies later down the line. The percentage chance of 10% stun and 25% lucky hit chance skill with only 8 resource generation makes this skill target slow and not very useful for utility. I'd avoid this one in general. Now, next up we have Wind Shear, and this one is incredible, especially for leveling. Not only does it generate 12 resource, it also makes enemies vulnerable, and the Wild upgrade gives it insane resource generation capability, especially early game. I would strongly recommend picking this up for your leveling Druid, especially if you're brand new to ARPGs, and heck, keep it on there for as long as you're comfortable with, because this might be the best basic skill, best in slot basic skill for the entire game. Now, Storm Strike is likely your best option if you're looking for a melee basic skill, especially if you're looking for Storm, as it generates a whooping 15 resource, deals more damage than any other basic skill, and also has 25% damage reduction. The Fierce upgrade here is more the useful of the two upgrades that you can choose, as you'll use other skills to do your damage, so making enemies vulnerable has far more utility. I'd still consider Wind Shear over this one for leveling, but keep this one in mind if it slots into your endgame build better later down the road. Now we jump down into the core skills. Tornado here is a great option for core skills, especially later on, as damage scaling with random damage all over the screen can be quite good with certain aspects. However, early on, during leveling, this skill is impossible to control, and so you'll do poor damage with it even if its on-sheet damage output is quite good. I'd avoid this for leveling, but there definitely will be several different in-game Wind Druid skills that center around this skill, so keep this one fresh in your mind and don't write it off yet. Lightning Storm is another option for nature magic, and it can do good area of effect damage, but the requirement to channel it for a significant amount of time makes it a poor skill in general. It can be extremely resource hungry, especially during leveling, and it performs poorly on bosses and single target damage. I'd recommend avoiding this skill unless it somehow ends up coming online in very late endgame, which right now I don't really see a lot of theory crafting around this skill. Landslide is my personal choice for leveling a Druid core skill, and this is primarily because of its insane 113% damage modifier. Primal is the obvious choice here, and you'll notice that here there's even a small bug in my card because the Terramote effect is so long. But let me explain it here. Essentially, there's a guaranteed critical strike, and this is an incredible ability that you'll see later down the tree that this synergizes extremely well with Wolves, one of the other best leveling skills. Now, Pulverize is a pretty strong core skill, especially for area of effect damage, but it suffers during leveling from low single target DPS. The Shockwave aspect here is key. If you manage to find this aspect, you'll want to immediately consider respeccing into Pulverize and Werebear in general. Both Primal and Raging are excellent options depending on what you're going for, with Raging being better for leveling, while Primal is better at endgame. I think this skill might be the center of some of Druid's best endgame builds, so keep a close eye on it. Shred is the core werewolf skill, and unfortunately it performs very poorly with poor damage and a somewhat strange way to use the skill. So what's important to know about this skill is that when it's triggered, it performs 3 different attacks, and you can actually cancel the animation accidentally or intentionally. And if you do cancel the animation, those other attacks won't occur at all. These extra attacks take a significant amount of time to complete, so the damage output here is pretty poor. And it's easy to accidentally make it even worse by canceling these other animations. I'd avoid this skill if you can, especially for leveling. Druid has a few passives on the core skill cluster, including Wild Impulses, Abundance, Heart of the Wild, Predatory Instincts, Digidegrade Gate, and Iron Fur. Most of these are fairly minor and are only worth taking if they slot into your build later on. Avoid these while leveling and head further down the skill tree. Cyclone Armor is our first of our defensive skills for Druid, and it's fairly strong, but this skill stands in the shadow of its bigger brother, Earthen Bulwark. Only take this skill if you really are having some significant survivability issues, sort of like towards the end game, and you need some additional damage reduction. Earthen Bulwark, on the other hand, is an incredible skill, and it's an auto include to nearly every Druid build because it has Unstoppable, Barrier, and Base Life as Fortify defensive mechanics. All of these mechanics are incredibly strong defensively, and having them all baked into one skill lets the Druid dip into a little bit of everything that it needs to have for escape and survivability on one button. At only a 16-second cooldown, it will be up almost any time that you need it. Don't leave home without Earthen Bulwark. Debilitating Roar is an interesting skill, but it falls flat because most of its effects can be gained from other sources. The damage reduction is actually quite good, but it only lasts 4 seconds, which is disappointing for taking an entire skill. I'd avoid this unless you have a very specific reason for including it in your Werebear-based build, along with the supporting aspects for it. Now, Blood Howl is an embarrassment of a skill that can easily be replaced by a health potion. Why this skill exists is a mystery to me, but perhaps some aspect exists that makes it godly later down the road. I don't know. I'd avoid this skill at all costs unless there is some other supporting aspect or unique in the game that somehow just turns this into a good skill magically. The defensive skill cluster has both Ancestral Fortitude and Vigilance passives on it, granting some additional damage reduction for the Druid. These are fairly optional, and if you're leveling, I'd avoid these and move further down the skill tree. You should only really consider these passives if you really need a bit more survivability for an endgame build and you just have nothing better to do with your skill points. Finally, we make it to the companion skill cluster. One mistake that many Druids will make while leveling is that they'll avoid the companion skills, and instead they'll dump points into their core skills or in other places on the skill tree. This is a huge mistake. The most important skill cluster for leveling for the Druid is this companion skill cluster, and it cannot be avoided unless you want to level slowly for some reason. So first up, we have Ravens. This is my least favorite of the companion skills, but it still provides a bit of passive damage and vulnerability should you need it. I'd avoid this companion skill at first in favor of the others, as the other two are far stronger. Wolves is one of the most important Druid leveling skills, and it's my personal choice for smashing through the game. The Brutal upgrade here is key, and you'll want to maximize your critical strike chance with abilities like Landslide to make your wolves really shine. While this was quite good during the open beta, Blizzard has actually buffed the base damage values of wolves since then, so you can expect this skill to be even better at launch and during the Server Slam beta. It's especially strong on bosses, as wolves individually team up and gnaw down on their health. Definitely take Wolves while leveling. Necromancer, eat your heart out. Vine Creeper works incredibly well as a companion, slowly poisoning everything on the battlefield and immobilizing enemies when needed. You can even take both Vine Creeper and Wolves together, combined with the Brutal upgrade, which gives you even more critical strike chance. This skill is incredible for leveling and will always damage enemies near you. Some kind of poisoning build as well. Don't skip out on Vine Creeper, especially while you're leveling. Companion skills also have a few passive skills, including Clarity, Nature's Reach, and Call of the Wild. Nature's Reach here might be one of Druid's best passives, so I'd strongly consider using it even while leveling up. Up to 18% multiplicative damage is really incredible for 3 skill points, especially if you're combining this with something like Landslide. The other 2 passives are fairly easy to ignore and aren't significant in any other way. All right, we're past the halfway point, and now as we make our way down to Druid's Wrath skills. First up is Hurricane. Now by itself, Hurricane is quite bad, and I opt to put more skill points into your main core or companion skills first while leveling. But later on, it could be a useful source for you for vulnerable or damage reduction on enemies surrounding you, especially if you're going for one of these like Storm, Wind Druid style builds. Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend taking Hurricane while leveling due to its poor damage output, and its utility is only really useful later down the road. Boulder can be a great choice for Nature Druids, and it's my personal choice for leveling after I've maxed out Landslide and Wolves. The extra critical strike chance here is fairly free, and the knockback gives you some great grouping options before dropping Vine Creeper. The 10-second cooldown is extremely short, meaning that you can use this for free without impairing your other damage-dealing attacks. Overall, it slots well into a Druid build, but it might end up falling off later in the endgame when your truly powerful options come online. Now, if you didn't take Earth and Bulwark, you have to take Trample, as it's your only other source of Unstoppable as a Druid. This is an interesting skill that can both function as an escape or as a grouping skill. This skill also fits well into a Shockwave, Pulverize, Werebear build, so keep your eye on this one, as it has some significant potential at endgame. It also has some very fast movement speed, which is something that the Druid doesn't get a ton of from other sources. So keep your eye on this one. Rabies is my least favorite skill of the Wrath skills, as the damage that it does is insignificant and slow. It's cool to watch poison spread from enemy to enemy, but there are much better ways to do damage in this game. Even at endgame, I don't really see any theory crafting potential with this skill right now, unless there's a truly viable poison werewolf build that we've yet to see. Druid's Wrath passives have a significant tree of storm-oriented skills, and while they all sound very impressive, they're hamstrung by their lucky hit chance dependency. This means that these passives won't trigger as much as you really think they will, and thus this passive tree only becomes viable for some end-game elemental builds, especially around Storm. Elemental Exposure, Endless Tempest, Charged Atmosphere, Bad Omen, and Electric Shock all suffer from these same issues, and should probably be avoided during the leveling stages of the game, especially because companion skills can deal this same damage directly and faster. The Earth passives on the Wrath tree here have more utility than these, including Crushing Guard, Stone Guard, Safeguard, Mending, and Provocation, but unfortunately focus on survivability alone, making them a poor fit for a leveling build. These passives seem destined for an endgame Werebear build though, so keep a close eye on these as you seek to become the ultimate tank. Now, Neurotoxin and Venom and Toxic Claws are the final passives on the Wrath tree, centered around a poison werewolf build, and these are some of Druid's absolute worst passives, especially during the leveling stages of the game. Their damage is slow and inconsistent due to the critical strike dependency for Toxic Claws. I'd avoid these entirely until a truly viable endgame poison build becomes a real option. Now, in true Druid fashion, the ultimate tree contains not 3, but 4 ultimates to choose from. Now, all of these ultimates are fairly bad, but hey, so is nearly almost every single ultimate in the entire game. Now that said, Blizzard has buffed these significantly since the open beta, so the cooldowns that you see here on my skill cards, they will be reduced in the upcoming Server Slam beta and at launch. Now first up we have Cataclysm. Just throw this skill in the trash because it's taking up space in your house. Nobody wants to do 52% damage for 8 seconds at the cost of a skill slot. Until this is buffed or changed significantly by an aspect, you can safely ignore this ultimate skill. Petrify might be the best of the Druid ultimates because it does an incredibly long and instantaneous stun and increases your critical strike damage by an insane amount, including 50% to bosses. This is especially strong for critical strike leveling builds that include landslide and wolves, and it's actually worth taking during your druid leveling build. Still, I'd expect to optimize this skill out of my build at endgame, where you'll be laying down screenfuls of damage constantly. Grizzly Rage on paper seems like an amazing ultimate. Who wouldn't want to turn into an unstoppable werebear and smash enemies? And it's okay. Unfortunately, your skill points for werebear builds are usually better spent elsewhere, and it's usually easy to gain Fortify on percentage base life mechanics elsewhere on the tree on other skills that give you other better benefits. This might be useful to you if you're lucky enough to get the Shockwave Pulverize combo while leveling, but otherwise I'm not optimistic on this skill overall. Maybe there's a chance for it to shine at endgame. Now, Lacerate is a fairly straightforward ultimate that deals damage and it heals you, but ultimately it falls flat due to its low damage and its high cast time. Now, while you're casting this skill, you could be doing damage with your other abilities, and there doesn't seem to be a strong synergy with any other skills on the tree for this ultimate either. I'd probably avoid this one in favor of other damage dealing skills. Now let's explore some of the passives that are here on the ultimate node. Nature Magic has a small passive tree here, including Defiance, Circle of Life, Natural Disaster, and Resonance. Strangely, this passive tree wants you to swap between both Storm and Earth skills, which is a fairly limiting thing from a build perspective. Still, an 18% multiplicative bonus is hard to ignore, and if you're gonna go for Nature Magic, this could be an important piece of your endgame build to pick up. We also get a small tree of passives off the ultimate node here centered on shapeshifting, including Quick Shift, Natural Fortitude, and Heightened Senses. These passives are fairly dull, and shifting back and forth between forms isn't particularly useful at any stage of the game, so I'd probably ignore these for almost any build. Finally, the ultimate node gives us a small passive tree of defensive-oriented nodes centered around Fortify mechanics. These include Defensive Posture, Thick Hide, Nature's Resolve, and Unrestrained. These all seem fairly tame and not terribly useful for most builds, since it's fairly easy to stack Fortify and base life mechanics almost anywhere on the Druid class. Still, if your particular build doesn't have any Fortify mechanics on it for some reason, this is a good place to pick a bit of those extra mechanics up and a bit extra Fortify. Finally, at the end of the Druid skill are key passives. Now, you can only select one of these incredible, powerful, and build-defining passives, so make sure that you choose wisely. Druid has more key passives in it than any other class, giving you the ultimate flexibility in your build. First up is Ursine Strength. This is a great key passive, netting us a flat 30% multiplicative increase to most of our skills for our Werebear Druid. This might seem plain and simple, but it's straight up one of the strongest damage multipliers that you can get anywhere on the tree, and pretty much an auto-include for any Werebear-oriented build. Bestial Rampage is focused around you shifting back and forth from werewolf to werebear, and this key passive unfortunately is quite bad because there's no good reason to shift like this for any build. Even if you did, the bonuses here are easily outshined by other key passives. And even if you did have a build that used both werewolf and werebear skills, constraining you to use both in a limited time period like this ignores one of the most important pieces of any Diablo game. Making one big damage skill good and then buffing your character to do everything that they can with that particular skill is almost always the meta build for any particular class. Lupine Ferocity has some potential because guaranteed critical strikes are a rare thing in Diablo 4. If you can slot this into a werewolf build that somehow turns critical strikes into insane damage through other mechanics like wolves, this key passive will be instrumental to making a good werewolf build. This key passive also hints towards Poison Werewolf just not being a viable thing, and instead pushes werewolf-oriented builds in the direction of critical strikes, perhaps also making other critical strike skills like Landslide, Wolves, and Petrify useful in a werewolf build. Earthen might seem strong and has a crazy effect, but a 5% lucky hit chance is an incredibly low rate. The main issue is that Earth skills tend to be slow to cast as well, making this key passive incredibly inconsistent. I'd avoid this key passive in general unless there's a way to cast Earth skills at a very, very fast attack speed. Nature's Fury again pushes us into swapping of Earth and Storm skills like the Resonance passive. In general, getting a free cast of a skill really just isn't that valuable, and there are plenty of resource aspects for rings that invalidate this key passive. Even worse, you have to use both a Earth and Storm skill to activate this, making it quite clunky to use. Maybe there's a swap build later down the road, but I just don't see it right now. Perfect Storm is a pretty incredible option for Storm Druids, as free spirit generation off of any Storm skill opens up infinite core skill casting builds quite a bit if there's enough resource generation from resource aspects on rings or from other sources. A Tornado Druid build here might be quite viable once you pick up this key passive, as you'll finally have some decent source of resource generation. I'd keep a close eye on this one, because I think it's much better than it seems at first glance, and that we're going to see some end-game builds that use this key passive right off the bat. Thanks for watching. If detailed information like this interests you, then please subscribe. Let me know down in the comments as well what your favorite Druid skills are and what build that you're thinking of putting together based on these skills. I'll see you down in the next one. Peace.